Okay, I just want to double check that we're going live. Forgive me, I'm having some. I don't know why EV Mux is doing this with YouTube. Okay, there we go. We're live. Okay, so thank you all for joining today's live stream discussion. I'm going to be speaking yet again with the geopolitical analyst Carl Zha. We're going to be talking, obviously, about the Iran war, but we're also going to be talking about the Chinese perspective. I want to ask Carl, as an expert on Chinese affairs, and get his opinion on, what kind of support China has provided to Iran prior to the war and what kind of support they may be providing now. Obviously, a lot of people believe that the Chinese aren't doing enough, or maybe they're going to get involved and this is going to be World War III. So we're going to get a level-headed assessment from the man, the myth, the legend, Carl Zha. So Carl, thank you so much for joining the show yet again.
Hi, Ahmad. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So Carl, let's just get right into it. What was your assessment? What did you think about the initiation of this war? Were you expecting it or were you surprised?
Well, I wasn't sure actually. As you know, I got a invitation to attend a media event into Iran, and this was happening at the time when the U.S. Armada was sailing toward the Gulf. So I wanted to wait and see what happens, and I'm actually surprised that Trump launched this attack, despite advice by many of the military advisors that tell him this will be a bad idea. I think what happened was the whole Venezuelan operation had really got to their heads. They got a little overconfident. Trump thinks he can do to Iran what he did in Venezuela, which is a decapitation strike. In case of Venezuela, they kidnapped President Maduro, and they went out and to take out Iranian senior leadership. They thought the rest of the Iranian government will quickly fall in line and perhaps work out a deal with United States. But that's not the case. Iran is a whole different power. Iran is a regional power in West Asia, as U.S. and Israel are finding out. And what Iran did in response actually exceeded my expectations. Right now, Iran is systematically dismantling the U.S. empire infrastructure that had been put in place for decades. We saw $1 billion radar just got taken out, and U.S. possessed of 11 THAAD anti-missile system. Each of those THAAD launchers cost upwards of to $1 billion. And out of that 11 THAAD launchers, Iran has already destroyed 3. And this is why South Korean media is reporting that United States is preparing to relocate the THAAD system that was deployed in South Korea against China to West Asia, because they are seriously worried about their holes in their missile defense. And we already know the problem for U.S. and Israel in the 12-day war was their low stocks of missile interceptor. Well, that problem hasn't gone away. We had the Wall Street Journal reporting back from 12 days war where 25% of the missile interceptor were depleted in the 12 days war. Well, I don't think that situation has changed. Now we're in day 4 or day 5 of what Trump calls special combat operation. They're too chicken shit to even declare war. So they're calling it a special combat operation. And I just saw Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, said this operation could go on for possibly 8 weeks. I don't think they have any idea how long this is going to go. I think they expected a quick victory because Trump always aimed for the low-hanging fruits. He thought the Iranians will quickly fold. But what we're seeing right now is we're seeing U.S. bases all over Middle East is under fire. And it looks like the U.S. air defense system is not that effective because we have other than this billion-dollar radars and THAAD systems that's been destroyed, you have U.S. personnel that's seeking shelter in hotels being hit. And Iran has compared to the 12-day war, Iran really, has upped their game. It looks like they got a lot better in targeting. They knew exactly what to hit, where to hit, and what they're doing is they're blinding the U.S. Military right now. They're taking out all the radar systems. So they're the so right now we see what the we saw some videos on social media posted by both the Israeli defense accounts and as well as the United States military. They were literally striking. They were literally striking outlines of a drone painted on the ground. They're sending $1 million missiles to strike a $10 paint job on concrete. So this is why they're getting really desperate right now. This is why they have resorted to carpet bombing of one of the densest urban centers in the world. This is the capital of Iran, Tehran. Now they're just doing indiscriminate bombing. They're bringing the Gaza treatment to Iran. But this will not go unanswered because Iran is also launching attacks against Israel. They already hit one Israel's desalination water plant, and I was tweeting on Twitter. I said Iran has shown remarkable restraint because those water desalination plants provide majority of Israel's drinking water. You should take now. There's one down and five more to go. So if they do take out the remaining desalination plants in Israel, Israel will be in existential crisis.
Very interesting point. You kind of answered a lot of the questions I was going to have for you. You've commented now on Iran's strategy of eliminating these radars, which it doesn't fully blind the Americans, but what it does is it removes a bunch of layers of early detection. And so it just increases the likelihood that Iran's missiles will strike their targets without being intercepted. And we've already seen a lot of footage of Iranian missiles maneuvering through the sky and, 3, 4, in some cases, we've seen 10, 11 air defense missiles miss the interception and the Iranian missile get through anyway. I want to show you this. I have it shared on the screen now. Just let me know, confirm that you can see it.
I can see it.
Okay, good. This is a tweet by Thomas Keith. He says, evidence obtained shows that the U.S. military in Qatar is now firing PAC-2 interceptors manufactured in 2000 after burning through their PAC-3 stock. It matches everything about U.S. air defense attrition under sustained Iranian missile and drone pressure. Qatar's own oldest missiles date back to 2003, 2004, which means this 2000 dated hardware had to come from U.S. reserve stock shipped before the war. That alone signals depletion. Either Washington is hoarding its final PAC-3s for a critical scenario, or it has already run out. Interceptors aren't supposed to live past 10 to 15 years. Using a 26-year-old component means they are stitching missiles together from aging parts just to keep the batteries breathing. Now, I think this is an interesting point because it confirms that Iran has successfully degraded stockpiles. However, what he's saying is that they're taking components from older missiles. You have talked so many times about how China controls the logistics for the components, the semiconductors, and these other things I don't understand that build these systems. So can you elaborate further on this situation here?
Okay, this is not coming from me. This is coming from Pentagon. They have published a paper to trace all the necessary components for U.S. munitions and U.S. weapon systems. And ultimately, it traces to supply chains in China. And China has been putting in a lot of export restriction on so-called dual-use items. This is patterned after U.S. Sanction on so-called dual-use item on China. And this goes beyond even rare earth. We know rare earth is a very critical component, and China controls 90% of the rare earth refining capacity. Even the rare earths that we're digging out in California, in Mountain Pass mine in California, they still have to send over to China for processing. And China has put the rare earth ban, the Chinese ban on rare earth export to U.S. military industrial complex still stands. So U.S. is going to have a very hard time to replenish its stock. Mark Rubio himself talked about this. Mark Rubio said, "Oh, the reason we have to launch the attack now is because Iran, with the help of China, they're producing tons of missiles, and then we can only produce like a interceptor in several like one interceptor in matters of month. And if we allow this to go on, we would not be able to keep up. And that's the reason given by Marco Rubio for carrying out this attack for now. But we know that's all bogus. They're doing this because of Epstein. This is whole reason they name it Epic Fury is because now if you put in search engine Trump EP, so instead of Trump Epstein, you will come up as Trump, Epic Fury. They're trying to do all this gimmick, trying to game the searching system, search engine. But and also this is really at behest of Israel, as as Marco Rubio himself admitted. They're doing this because Israel wants to hit Iran, and Israel wants to hit Iran because Iran wants to dominate Middle East, and Israel wants to dominate Middle East, and Israel sees Iran as an existential threat to its plan for hegemony in the Middle East. And plus, Iran has been a steadfast supporter of the Palestinian cause. So it's Israel's intention to do either regime change or completely balkanize Iran to basically to get rid of Iran as a coherent political entity that could pose any threat to Israel. And to that end, they're dragging United States along to accomplish that goal. And Donald Trump, of course, I think he's getting some very bad advice from his advisors that he thought this was going to be a cakewalk, that the Iranian people will rise up, welcome us as liberators. This is the same the Iraq redux happening again, except Iran is a much larger country. Iran is a country of 90 million people. It is a regional power. It has tons and tons of missiles. I mean, so far we only seen Iran deploying a small fraction of their arsenal. The goal is still to wear down the missile interceptors. Once the missile interceptors runs out, all the skies over Israel and all the U.S. bases will be wide open. I mean, even today, they are managed to hit the U.S. Bases without fail. It doesn't seem like the U.S. air defense is helping much on those U.S. bases. And what they say is there's no official confirmation. There's no verification until the official denial. Now we have the official confirmation because Trump himself during the press briefing said, "We have virtually unlimited stockpiles of munition. We will never run out." They're running out. They're running low, and they're getting desperate. And one of the way it shows their desperation is now they're talking about weaponizing the Kurds from Iraqi Kurdistan to go launching a ground offensive into Western Iran, maybe helped by U.S. Embedded U.S. special forces and U.S. air power. They want to do it like a Afghanistan redux, which is completely preposterous because the Kurdish majority region of Iran is only this sliver of land on the western border. And if they do, and this whole operation is weird. It's like, why would they advertise it? Why would they open it? I mean, this is like the most advertised CIA operations. They keep on saying, "Oh, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this." I think that they're trying to create distraction, and also they're basically at this point they're desperate. So they're throwing shit on the wall to see what sticks. I don't think that will have an effect because Iranian people are very patriotic people. They may have disagreement with their own government, but you saw that once the bombing starts, all the protests against government disappeared. Now it's all that they're protesting against bombing. Nobody likes to be bombed. Nobody likes to be liberated by American bombs. That's a fiction. So we so right now Iran is united. They're not giving, and the whole um, plan of decapitation strike didn't pan out because Iran prepared for that eventuality. We have Iranian diplomats saying, "Oh, our military is kind of independent right now because they're following plans that were laid out in advance." So what that tells me is Iran they had contingency plans for a decapitation strike in case of senior leadership getting taken out. So they're given like necessary autonomy to the military commanders, and they are following their plans to a T, and they are striking at the U.S. empire where it hurts. I mean, we are seeing the U.S. empire system that had been carefully constructed over decades in West Asia slowly crumbling right now. It's not only the physical infrastructure that's getting demolished, but also the whole entire premise of the U.S. alliance system. Because the whole reason all these Gulf monarchies host U.S. base is under the premise that U.S. will extend the security umbrella to those Gulf monarchies to protect them from Iran and to protect them from their own people. And we saw on social media the Bahraini citizens cheering for the Iranian missiles hitting U.S. bases. So all this premises of U.S. empire is just gone in smoke. So they're quite, the more they confidently posturing in front of the camera, that just them try to hide their desperation.
That was a very interesting series of points. You are right. Pete Hegseth came out basically yesterday bragging that they were going to establish air superiority. And, initially that feels kind of scary. It's like, okay, well, that's kind of the nightmare, right? That the U.S. Air Force could dominate the skies of Iran. But then when you think about the fact that the U.S. is the largest, most powerful military, not only on Earth, but in the history of humanity, they have the largest, most advanced Air Force. Of course, Iran wasn't going to be able to fend off their fighter jets for so long. And then, it just made me remember that this is an asymmetric war, and that this is basically what Hamas or what the Viet Cong in Vietnam had to do, where they took the fight underground. In Iran, the difference is it's so much larger, it's mountainous, and they have entire cities underground that can enrich uranium. They can build missile launchers. They can build missiles themselves, drones, constant production. And I saw a clip today I want to show you. They're launching missiles from underground. So when they talk about the U.S. Hunting these missile launchers, you just have to stop and think, like, are they going to be able to find these missiles that are underground? So let me go ahead and find this clip for you here, if you just give me a second. And I want to ask, actually, if you've seen this clip already, because it's very interesting to me. Let me see.
Well, I have seen plenty of clips. They hitting a painting on the ground. Like they're hitting literally painted outline of a drone, a missile launcher on the ground, and they have the audacity to post it on social media to claim that's a victory. When anybody with a good pair of eyes could see, they didn't hit a missile launcher or drone. Those are literally $10 paint job on the concrete.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That was an anamorphic painting, the one that you're referencing. Yeah, that was funny. And there's a lot of these kinds of clips coming out. And so if you just bear with me here, I'll pull up this clip. Here it is. Okay.
Sure.
And I'll just add it to the scene. Here it is. So I want to show you and the audience this clip. So take a look at this. That is a missile coming from underground. Now, I don't know if that's a ballistic missile or if it's like a surface-to-air missile, maybe a cruise missile. But that thing came out of the ground. You don't see the launch there. Look at that. There's another one. So apparently Iran is the first nation to actually do something like this. And this fascinates me because this is essentially what their plan is, right? It's to be able to fight an asymmetric war and keep the missiles coming, even if the U.S. has air superiority. So what do you make of that? I mean, I guess for you in the long term, what do you view as the Iranian strategy?
Well, the Iranian strategy is to survive. I mean, to survival. They're right now fighting an existential battle, which is quite different from the U.S. and Israeli aim, right? I mean, Israeli aim is just regime change, or short of that, destabilization of Iran. You know, Netanyahu was interviewed on saying, he doesn't care what happens to Iran as long as they get hammered, they get weakened. Or balkanized, he doesn't care. But for U.S. perspective, for the Trump administration, I don't think they have a clear aim. They probably thought they could pull another Venezuela, by decapitating the senior leadership and then negotiate with whatever remain of a government. But that doesn't seem is happening. The Iranians have digged in, and this. And people also have to look at from the Iranians' perspective. This was a perfidious attack. United States, for the second time, launched an attack on Iran in the midst of negotiation, right? And obviously, the negotiation was in bad faith. This is equivalent of, a lot of Americans get angry when I point out this on Twitter. This is equivalent to Pearl Harbor. This is the same as the Japanese launching a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor while in the midst of a negotiation, and on top of that, they went after the senior leadership, and these are the things that Iranian leadership can't just simply look away. We know the Trump administration has been sending feelers immediately afterwards to reopen negotiation. But why would any Iranian leaders at this point trust any kind of negotiation with the United States? And even if they do, why would they want to? This is like, because you have seen U.S. done this again and again and again. They first kill Soleimani, and then they tell Iranians, "Oh, please don't retaliate. Let's sit down and talk." And then they did it again during the 12 Days War. So why would you? If Iran doesn't make sure that U.S. face some consequences, then there will be no deterrence. The United States and have the they will get to strike whenever they want to. That's not acceptable. So for Iran to regain the escalation dominance, they need to make sure the U.S. and Israel will suffer a lot of pain and consequences for what they did. Now, one worry about on the Iranian side is, if U.S. and Israel do gain air dominance, then they will be able to send in like older bombers like B-52 to use cheaper ammunitions to drop on, and they will likely, to bomb Iranian urban centers like Tehran,
and that's already happened.
Bombing.
That's already happened. They've already launched B-52s.
Yeah. So that's not ideal, but Iran still has a lot of missiles up its sleeve. As long as they can make Israel hurt, and and as you mentioned, one advantage of Iran is it's a large country. It's a lot more spread out. Where Israel is pretty compact. Like all the target is all clustered together. Yeah. So in terms of taking pain, I think Israel is a lot less be able to take the pain that Iranian could. This is why they have to call a truce during the 12 Days War in the first place. But this time, but Netanyahu thought, okay, well, this is their last chance to do this. It's now or never, because they'll probably never get another U.S. president that would be so pliable. But maybe because they really have some real dirt on Trump diddling with kids. Because let's remember, Trump. There are a lot of U.S. presidents that have been under pressure by Israel to go attack Iran. Donald Trump is the one that actually went along with it. There must be some terrible shit in the whatever remains in the Epstein file they haven't released.
Yeah, well, they could also just be really stupid. And I think this is the concern that a lot of people had about Donald Trump when he was coming into office the first time in 2016. Like, what exactly is this guy's policy, and really he's just the greediest person. So even without the Epstein files, I mean, just pumping him with money and opportunities for his empire, even though he's nearing death, he's a very old person. They're still tempting him, and it's enough for him to kind of go along with their decision making, and it's coming potentially at the expense of the U.S. empire. People have to understand now, when we say at the expense of the American empire, we don't mean America is going to lose and Iran is going to be invading the streets of New York City. No, but victory has to be defined differently, especially since this is an asymmetric war. And now you've talked a lot about Israel, but what we haven't talked about really are the Gulf countries. So let me just go ahead and share this to the screen. I want to show you this and the audience this as well. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and now you can see the strait is empty, and ships have basically parked themselves outside of it, and they aren't going through. Even though yesterday Donald Trump said, we will escort you and we will provide you a reasonable rate on insuring your ship. So basically said, like, let us drag you through this war zone and we'll protect you and insure you just in case you get hit. And every ship, you can see no one has taken the offer, and no one's going to take the offer because they don't want to risk their very expensive ships with their very expensive inventory getting destroyed. And the pressure now, I think, on the Gulf is going to be intense because the Gulf cannot make money at the rate that they're used to if they can't export their oil and their gas. And we've already seen Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, they've all suspended the production, and apparently just turning off these facilities is time consuming, and turning them back on is time consuming. And so if the war ended today, it would be 2 weeks before they produced oil and a month and a half before they could actually reach their destination. That alone is why oil has gone up by a couple of percent. But this is going to keep dragging on. And if it really gets ugly, Iran won't just threaten to close the strait, but they'll actually start bombing ships, potentially even the facilities themselves. So what do you make of that? And also, the reason why I'm asking you this is because a lot of this energy goes to China. So is China hurting, or has China prepared for this?
Yeah. So, there's actually a lot of social media accounts and even a Hudson Institute paper that came out trying to portray Trump as having some grand strategy, playing 5D chess against China. This is all a move to cut off China from its vital energy source. First you go after Venezuela, and then you got to go after Iran, and then China will be screwed when Donald Trump comes knocking in Beijing in April for the meeting with Xi Jinping. But if you, first of all, this is just a lot of copium. If you actually look at the numbers, the data, China is actually one of the best country to position to weather the storm. In the last 4 years, China has been taking advantage of the historically low oil prices to build the world's largest strategic oil reserve. China has about 1.5 billion barrels of oil sitting in their strategic oil reserve right now, which can last China through for at least 6 months. And on top of that, there's currently 166 million barrels of Iranian oil that's sitting in tankers already in East China Sea, about to head into ports. So China can sit this out for 6 months, not a problem. Now, this is not, and on top of that, China has China's largest oil the origin country is actually Russia. So China can just get more oil from Russia. Oil is a globalized commodity. It's fungible. China can get its oil from elsewhere. But this actually presents a huge problem for so-called U.S. ally countries like Japan, like South Korea, like the Philippines, and even India. All these countries depend on the oil coming from the Gulf, and they don't have access to Russian oil anymore. And India actually just sent an urgent plea to Washington to ask for a waiver for them to again start to purchase in Russian oil, because Modi had agreed prior to Washington demand to stop taking Russian oil. But now, they face a existential crisis, that now they're begging Washington's permission to allow them to purchase Russian oil again. That's actually pretty humiliating. Like, why would you even need to beg for permission from Washington? You are like a freaking regional power. You are inheritor of one of the ancient civilizations. Why do you need to beg for permission to buy Russian oil? But anyway, so China is actually better positioned to weather the storm than the other countries that I have already mentioned. And um but the reason that Iran is hitting all these Gulf countries, you have Jon Stewart on his show. It's like, oh, it's U.S. and Israel hitting Iran, but why is Iran hitting all these other countries? Well, I mean, this can only works on his ignorant American audiences, because if you look on a map, U.S. bases are spread all over these Gulf countries, and these, without the basis, that will put the U.S. military in a serious pinch, because eventually the U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, they will run out of ammunition and they run out of fuel, and they will need to restock. And if they have bases, they go to the bases where they load up on fuel and ammo. Well, guess what? They don't have places to go anymore, because those all their bases under pummeled by Iranian missiles. And now they have to go much further afield to refuel or to recharge. This is why Donald Trump was very upset at Spain, for Spain not allowing Spanish bases be used by the Americans in this operation. And then I received a news that Portugal offered their bases in Azores Island for U.S. military operation. And I look up Azores Island on Google Maps. It's in the middle of Atlantic, right? That's probably where they're going to base some U.S. Fuel tankers to help U.S. Planes to refuel. But yeah, this is going to be a problem. And this is also the leverage that Iran has. As you mentioned, all these Gulf countries, the oil and gas export is their life's blood. Now Dubai is really panicking, because you have all these influencers in Dubai right now putting up like almost boiler template videos saying, oh, look at Dubai. It's so safe right now. It's totally fine. Don't worry. Come to Dubai. You have people like Andrew Tate, what's that Malaysian guy, a Chong guy, and all these influencers. Yeah, and Miles Chong, yeah, and all these influencers suddenly getting on social media or TikTok, posting their little almost the same boilerplate videos about how Dubai is safe right now. They're getting paid by the Dubai government to do that, because they're desperate. This will force these Gulf monarchy to reevaluate their priorities, right? Will they still allow U.S. bases on their soil to operate out of their country? And this is what I mean when I said Iran is consistently, systematically dismantling the U.S. empire system. It's like now we see it's a U.S. empire is a paper tiger. It's very fragile. Just hit their bases. And as for whether this is a 5-dimensional chess against China, that's ridiculous. China can China can wait this out, for at least 6 months, and they can increase their oil intake from Russia, from Africa, from other parts of the world. And Venezuela oil is still going to China. In case a lot of people don't know that, but Venezuelan oil currently is still going to China. So China will be doing fine. But countries like South Korea, Japan, South Korea's stock market just crashed almost 20% in the last 2 days. I mean, because of that. I mean, because that they're getting cut off from their main energy source from the Gulf. So U.S. is basically tanking the economy of much of Asia right now, and they're screwing over India, the Philippines, everybody. So, but it does benefit U.S. because U.S. is now the world's largest oil producer, and U.S. is actually an oil exporter. So for the U.S. big oils, they're gonna pocket a lot of money because the oil prices go up. It doesn't benefit. I don't know how much it benefit average Americans because your gas pump price is also gonna go up. It's an oil major. If you work for the oil company, it's great, but if not, it's tough. It's actually benefit Russia as well because the oil, with the rising oil price, like Russia is suddenly making up for their budget shortfalls, like literally overnight. So there's a lot of unintended consequences. But in terms of China, they have, like I said, they have 6 months of reserve, and they also are doing a massive build out of solar, wind, and nuclear energies. They're adding 4% of their own domestic energy production per year. So if the Iranian export to China comes up to about 13%. I say 13% is because if you look at the data of China's oil import from 2025, the top three countries is Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Malaysia. And you're like, what? Malaysia? Really? Malaysia is an oil producer, but they cannot provide oil to China at that quantity. So a lot of the Malaysian oil is actually relabeled Iranian oil and Venezuelan oil. By those so-called shadow fleet, they will sail to South China Sea, and then they to offload their oil to a Malaysian tanker, get relabeled as Malaysian oil and export to China. And we know what that figure is: 13%. 13% of China's oil import come from Malaysia. Now, 13%. Now, China, out of China's energy import, 59% is oil, but if you look at so about 10% of China's energy import come from Iran and Venezuela. And now, if you look at the total China's energy matrix, China is energy self-sufficient about 84%. So they import about 16% of their energy. So, if you do the math, 16% times 10%. So all that comes to about 1.6% tops of all China's energy needs is coming from Iran and Venezuela. And China is adding over 4% of their own primary energy production via other means every year. And they're doing a massive rollout of EVs for that reason. This is why they electrify their railroad. All the Chinese high-speed rails are running on electricity. And China has a massive, massive coal reserve. So China will be okay.
This is all very, very interesting. And so it sounds like China's trying to eliminate risk as much as it possibly can all across the board. On the one hand, it's obviously preparing for the event that it may not be able to obtain more Iranian or Venezuelan oil, and it doesn't want to be dependent. And so it's eliminating these dependencies on other countries for their energy, and they're doing that by nuclear power, hydropower. They have their coal. They're electrifying the infrastructure for transportation, as you've said, through the EV cars and the railways. And of course, the renewable energy. And I think there was actually a lot of progress made in not fission or fusion. I forget which one, but there's some rapid development being made there. That's a little further away. But the point is, China is not stupid. Like everyone kind of everyone perceives this as, oh, if Iran falls, China's done, and it's like, it sounds like, no, I mean, they're well aware of this. They've been planning for this, and they're preparing. But at the same time, not only are they preparing for the event that Iran cannot provide them oil anymore, but it sounds like they're still assisting Iran through, I imagine, intelligence, but also we saw reports of anti-ship missiles, obviously the Beidou navigation system. What other ways, lastly, can you tell us about the Chinese military potentially supporting Iran?
Well, let's start with what we know. What we know is China has provided Iran with the raw materials to make missiles. Iran's strongest weapons right now are its missiles. And unlike United States, which does face the bottleneck of rare earth restriction from China, Iran can source all the material it needs from China to make those missiles. We have the reports from Wall Street journals uh, about Iran taking shipments before the 12 Days War. And after 12 Days War, Iran continued to take those shipments of chemical precursors and other raw material needed to make missiles from China. And those are not these are also not dependent on ocean shipping because China did build a railroad, that connects to Iran. So all these materials can be shipped to Iran via railroad if needs be, and then what we also know is Iran has switched from using GPS, which you can't rely upon when you go into conflict with United States, to China's Beidou system. This is China's rival product to GPS. And what we have seen, even compared to the 12 Days War, the Iranians have improved their targeting system. Their whole targeting a whole great deal. They know where to hit. They know exactly what to hit. I think that this is there could be a various contributing factor. Iran obviously has some very good on the ground human intelligence, but also I think they're getting some satellite intelligence help from China. That really helped them to up their game in terms of selected targeting. And so these are kind of the areas where China is helping, in addition to purchase, of course, 90% of Iranian's oil export. And this is the difference between how China conducts its business and how United States conduct its business. Because U.S. politicians like Hegseth or Rubio or Trump, they like to beat their chest in front of the camera, like proclaim how great United States is, how we are doing all these things. Well, China prefer quiet diplomacy. China speak with a soft voice, but they prefer to do things behind the scenes. What you don't see is China is continually shipping the raw materials that Iran will need it to make its weapons, and China is providing the satellite intelligence for Iran's weapon targeting systems. And on top of that, let's keep in mind, you bet your top bottom dollar that there are tons of Chinese military observers in Iran right now, because both China and Russia, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get a front row seat to see how their weapon system works against the United States military, right? I mean, like, this is and also another thing I do want to mention, there's a lot of disinfo on social media, especially spread by Indian accounts, maybe hoping for clouds that's saying, oh, the Chinese air defense system proved totally ineffective. The HQ-9, HQ-8 was being destroyed. Iran actually we do not have any confirmation of Iran taking any delivery of the latest modern Chinese air defense system. From the videos that was being posted by Pentagon of all the system that been targeted, there might be one system that looks like a HQ-2, which was a Chinese air defense system manufactured back in 1957. So Iran actually do not have any Chinese air defense system that's manufactured in this century. So this is one area, in the future, China could help Iran with. But of course, that will take time because, the air defense system, those weapon systems are not plug in and play. It's not like you plug into the wall and it just works automatically. Maybe when AI gets more developed in 10 years, you will become that way. But today, you need a lot of training for personnel. And and it's really like modern warfare is really pit system against system. It's really about system integration. So even if Iran take delivery of Chinese air defense system today, it's going to take them at least 6 months to a year to be able to effectively integrate into their military. So
yeah, that's a very excellent point. So you can't really judge the hardware based off its delivery. It's it's is this being integrated into a system with well trained personnel, and so that's the unfortunate reality for Iran. They're just too late to getting a lot of these upgrades,
Yeah.
but they still do have a plan. They've prepared for this for the long haul. That's why Ali Lajiani, a high-level Iranian official, has said there will be no negotiations with the United States, and that Iran is prepared for a long war. The United States is not. And so they're betting on a war of attrition, and they've prepared for it. And so despite everything Pete Hegseth is saying, it's not clear that they're actually going to succeed. And we've already seen the timeline increase and increase. So go ahead.
I just like to throw out my little prediction here. I know
Please.
it's always fraud to predict the future, but given Trump is actually very predictable. I think most likely scenario is, somewhere down the road, maybe few weeks from now, Trump will say, you know what? Mission accomplished. We have wiped out the top Iranian leadership. We have stopped their nuclear program. We have accomplished all the aim we have set out to do. Give me a Nobel Peace Prize. This is what Trump does. And I bet Trump will do it again.
Well, thank you so much for that prediction, and thank you so much for being here. Guys, if this is your first time listening to Carl Zha, he's been on the show several times already. Take a look at his X account, where you'll find access to other links for his work. He is a geopolitical analyst. He shares his opinions not only on other shows like mine and many others, but he also has his own YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Carl Zha. That's ZHA. And he also has the Silk and Steel podcast on Chinese history. He's gone through thousands of years of Chinese history, and he's not even like 50% complete. And he's just taking his audience podcast by podcast episode all throughout Chinese history until he arrives at the modern day, where China is backing Iran in this war. So
You'll take me some time. You will definitely take longer than this war. How long this war will last? Yeah.
There's a long way to go for sure. But Carl, thank you so much again for being here, and we look forward to having you on again.